Hey everyone, it's Julio Rosas here with the Mostly Peaceful Podcast. Joining me today is Mike Howell, and the reason why I wanted to talk to Mike today because he and his team have been working on this project to really lay out in a detailed plan on what can be done to actually carry out mass deportations. And so, obviously, the subject is still a hot topic. It was just in Los Angeles last week, seeing anti-ICE rioters attacking DHS agents. DHS part of it is still kind of shut down. You know, the admin staff for ICE and CBP aren't getting paid. It's just obviously an ongoing thing. And a lot of people, particularly on Trump's base, they have become increasingly upset because in their view, mass deportations haven't been fully happening. And people were kind of expecting a uh, much quicker response just because of the scope of the problem and the urgency to try to fix the not just the Biden-Harris border crisis, but the the very long issue of immigration in general. So, Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Hey man, thanks for having me on.
Okay, so explain who helped put this together, and because I saw there was a lot of partnerships. We're gonna throw that up here in the edits. But yeah, so explain who was part of this, and then also explaining the timing. Why did you decide to put this out now as opposed to say at the beginning of the administration?
Yeah, because other options weren't working to get mass deportation started in the first year. And so it was time to band together people who really cared about this and were established voices and leaders, from Mark Morgan, who led CBP and ICE for Trump during Trump won, Eric Prince, who's clearly put together some big operations in his lifetime, all of these immigration national organizations, grassroots organizations, Data Republican, you name it. We got, people part of this coalition from various disciplines that all care deeply about this issue. And so, year number one, obviously there was mass deportation didn't happen. And I wouldn't even say it's not something that can be like measured in degrees. It was 350 deportations. That's really in line, kind of same neighborhood as previous administrations. And it's because of this shift from what was promised on the campaign trail of biggest mass deportation operation in American history, more than Eisenhower. And then it went into this like political space of, oh, we're only focusing on the worst of worst, which is comfort food for rhinos and stuff like that, and pollsters, because it's a problem in that there's not that many criminal illegal aliens out of the total illegal alien population. And so when you're focused on a small subset, you're gonna get small numbers. And so we decided that now was the time to really band together. There's 2 years and some change left in this administration, but it's going to require a shift out of that phase one type of operation and into phase two, which is actually a sincere effort at getting mass deportations going. And there's a lot of other things that happen on the way. I mean, when the White House political head says, don't say mass deportation, that means to me we got to scream it. And so that's what we're doing.
So to kind of play devil's advocate then, because and this is the way that I do see it because when especially in that first year where you have to get ICE the atrophy that they experienced under the Biden-Harris administration to kind of ramp things back up, not only to get back to their baseline, but to go beyond that. Obviously that would take time. And I remember Vice President Vance in March of last year when I asked him about this, like, hey, when are we gonna get things going? That was his reasoning. But then also, I mean, wouldn't you say that the administration has been stymied by the courts as well? Just because even something as simple as trying to get rid of temporary protective status has been blocked and is not even and it's almost immediate, right? When in terms of all the district judges. So and I'm not saying that that's the only reason why maybe the scope hasn't fully taken effect. But do you think that also certainly played a role in that?
No, not at all. The administration easily could have gotten to 1 million last year. It was a policy choice not to, even with all of the bad actors and headwinds, even taking them at their, full estimation, whether it's the courts or the activists or the politicians or special interests. And they could still get to 1 million this year, if not much more. It's a policy choice not to. It's because the administration chose to focus on a small subset of illegal aliens instead of the wider aperture. I mean, the worksite enforcement, you get to 1 million rather quickly. And instead, they chose not to do that. They went for what they thought was comfort food, where you could talk about like, how can you oppose deportations? These people are criminals, but then they started running out of criminals. And so until they decide consciously to actually commit to mass deportations, and obviously they're not doing that right now, they're telling people not to talk about it. the numbers will remain low. And so, yes, the courts and everyone else can be a hindrance to getting all of the illegals out. But as a baseline low level number of 1 million, which was the justification for the reconciliation package, they chose not to get to that number. It's a policy choice. That's what we're really trying to explain to people. It's a policy choice not to do this. It's a conscious choice. And it's a choice that ultimately only President Trump can make of whether to order them to do it or not.
And so then, because looking at your various points, yeah, number one, I mean, or one of the top ones that you said, it was definitely worksite enforcement, and I know that last year, President Trump said, well, we're not going to focus on farms or the hospitality industry because, yes, a lot of a lot of people who work in those industries are not fully legal or completely illegal, and so, but I think. What do you think about red states? Because I know in one of your other points that you outlined, you're talking about incentivizing and getting other red states to really do what Florida's done because Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis pushed for a law that said that you have to actively participate. All law enforcement agencies have to in the state have to participate. It's more than just allowing access to county jails because that's kind of like the bare minimum, and that's kind of what Minnesota was seen as a victory. It's like, well, they finally gave us access to county jails, across the state. Um, how much of the blame do you think red states bear who haven't gone as hard? Because you look at states like Idaho, you had sheriffs saying that speaking out against a bill that was very similar to Florida's, where they were saying like, well, we don't want to participate, we don't want to be forced to participate in this, and it's a state like Idaho. Because, and the reason why I bring that up is because I was recently with Florida Highway Patrol back in February, and at the time, from around March of last year to February of this year, all Florida agencies arrested and transferred over 20,000 illegal aliens to DHS. And so obviously not every state's going to have that same kind of, per capita population, but if you were to expand that to even half the states, it certainly would have added to the level of people in custody and then especially self-deportation. So that's my question is then how much of these red states that haven't done their part and why do you think that is?
Yeah. So, bouncing off the last point, without any cooperation from red states, the Trump administration could have gotten to 1 million deportations last year, full stop, and they could do it again this year, full stop. That being said, the red states aren't doing their part whatsoever. The numbers could get way higher than a million. Would they cooperate with the things you mentioned, like 287G and other kind of mechanisms, mandatory e-verify, you name it? I think their biggest hindrance, though, to the Trump administration and the agenda overall is political, rather. It is that they are a constant lobbying force and a voice in the ear of the White House and industry and the administration of saying, like, don't deport our, illegal labor. And it's the same moneyed interests that propel the governorships and the state legislatures are representing the illegal population via their corporate employers and those interests and stuff. And so it's that wind that's really the political wind in the Trump administration space, which I think has chilled their ability or willingness rather to carry out this program. And so our report goes into what states can do, and part of it, yes, is putting them on blast. These governors will all go back to Governor Kemp, for example. He rode around in a pickup truck talking about how he was going to put illegals in him and deport him as governor. And Georgia hasn't done any, been that tough on this issue at all. And, they'll wave the flag and yell Biden for the border crisis. But when it comes to like, okay, now we're actually going to deport your illegal workforce, they say not so fast. And so we need to really make sure voters understand that their governors and local leaders and state leaders are a hindrance there, whether it's not signing up for these programs or cooperating on the operational side, or if it's just their advocacy and politics of it all.
And so, because I follow you on X, and I see you've really been even prior to the release of this report have really been beating the drum about trying to pressure the Trump administration to make sure it lives up to its campaign promises because obviously you think that it hasn't. Um, since the release of your report and your outline, what have you heard from the administration and what do you think? And do you think they're feeling that extra pressure because it's not just random people on X, and I'm not even saying that they're bots, right? But because almost every time I see a lot of people being like, "What about the mass deportations? What about mass deportations?" But now you have, like you said, all the people that you mentioned previously who were involved in this report. And obviously it's very professionally done. It's not meant to just troon out, right? So to speak. It's not just it's to provide that framework to make sure that they can happen. So have you heard from anything from inside the administration since the report's been released?
Oh, quite a bit. I mean, it's no secret. I'm not going to kiss and tell with great specificity here, but I speak on behalf of a lot of very frustrated people inside the administration. It's no secret that there is divide within the administration as it relates to whether worksite enforcement or increased enforcement overall should happen in those who oppose it. I mean, that's been on full display. I'm not breaking news here, but I've been doing this a long time, and I have relationships across the administration, and often what I'm saying is an extension of some of the arguments that are happening inside the administration. And so, all that being said, yes, not only do I advocate for those who are fighting on the inside, but this report was greeted with great applause by many who have been on the losing side of these internal debates. They need to be shown, that there is an external coalition supporting this, that the politics are for it. I mean, that's what our polling showed. This still is immensely popular. And furthermore, if it doesn't happen, it's an immense problem for base motivation. And we all know midterms are about base motivation. And there needs to be a counterforce and weight to the special interest lobbying, which is what we're really doing. And so I'm sure I have my no shortage of detractors, not only on X, but for some people who don't want to see enforcement inside the administration. That I know for a fact. But they're outnumbered by many degrees by those who do want it to happen.
And so, I mean, so how did that happen, right? Because someone who covered the border crisis from start to finish, I spent so much time down there raising the alarm. I still remember that first year. It was mainly, independent reporters or, conservative media, and then you had like Bill Melugin from Fox News, um, highlighting the problem. And of course, Democrats were like, "Oh, it's a made up hoax. It's all, yeah, it's just racism." Until 2023 rolls around, and the problem had gotten so big that even Democratic cities couldn't even ignore it. And that's one huge reason why Trump was able to make his comeback. So how did we, in your view, how did we get to this point to where not only do we have to fend off the left and the legal kerfuffle, but people from inside the administration?
Yeah. So, obviously, if you raise your hand to go in the Trump administration at a place like DHS or ICE or elsewhere, you know what you're signing up for, right? When the president promises mass deportations, you go in there to do that. And it's not without consequence. But there's other creatures that can influence the direction of an administration that aren't those individuals. And those are the ones closer to the politics and the money of it all. The people who, raise money for campaigns, the pollsters. And people don't realize this, like I think at a fundamental level, but politics in America aren't about who has the better ideas. They're about who has the more money, largely. That's the most important single factor in any election. It's, the reason why politics are such big spending bonanzas where you have like $100 million spent in a primary in Texas. And the people who give money to those campaigns do not want mass deportations because for a variety of self-interested reasons. They don't want it to upset their illegal workforce and the huge benefits that incurs to super wealthy people who run these corporations. But when those are the people driving, kind of picking who gets the endorsements, who gets the funding, etc., you can see how the conflict stacks up over time. And then you have pollsters. Polls are very expensive, and so people pay them to do polls to say what they want them to say, and then they use those to wave around and say, "See, look, your mass deportation stuff isn't popular." And then you also have elite opinion, right? Like the people who operate at the highest levels of cabinets and even the White House. They deal with people in media and other like corporate types who are offended by kind of the notion of what they view as an unsavory campaign. The issue more largely. It's why Republicans have always been shy about the immigration issue. They view it as like low class. It's racially coded, or things of that nature. And so this explains the disconnect between the middle and the bottom versus the top, and those things weigh over time. And it just so happens that by the time we launched this Mass Deportation Coalition, we had enough of it and said, hey, we need to team up with the 80+% of Trump voters who actually want this done. And it's my view that President Trump, has been taking on headwinds from all those other folks. He needs some, wind behind his sails, actually, to say, like, no, we had your back when you promised this, and we're going to have your back to see it through.
And when you look at what has happened this year, because I mean, Gregory Bavino was really the face of it, going from Los Angeles when the riots started to then Chicago, Charlotte. I interviewed him when he was in New Orleans. I saw him again in Minneapolis, and obviously the events that took place there is was kind of the reason the cover that they were able to provide to get rid of him and now Kristi Noem. And so basically, at least from the outside reporting, that the factions of the people who were in control that wanted the big showy raids, who wanted people to know that that DHS was rolling in heavy into these cities, are no longer there. And in my view, I really do think that when it comes to self-deportations, those types of operations encourage that. And some people counter by saying, well, if they know that they're coming, that they'll leave the city or the state, which could be true, but clearly they still had a lot of arrests to make because I was with Border Patrol and ICE in some of those cities during those times. So do you think by as you mentioned, just really focusing on the targeting, even though yes, they have said that everyone's on the table, they are going to go after the worst of the worst, and everyone's going to be on the table. Um, how damaging do you think that was to motivate self-deportations? Because I know personally of three cases that took place last year here in Florida, and it wasn't just because we have a lot more Border Patrol agents that compared to some other states. So not only did they have to worry about DHS assets, but they also, because of that law, had to worry about local law enforcement as well, and that's why people decided to self-deport. So in the current state of things, do you think people are motivated to self-deport?